My mother's last words destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. She gripped my wrist with what little strength she had left and whispered, "You're not my son. I stole you from a billionaire's family in 1982. Then her eyes went still, and just like that, the only woman I'd ever known as my mother was gone, leaving me with a truth that didn't fit anywhere in my world. My name is Daniel Reed. I was 37 years old when she died in a small county hospital in upstate New York. I'd been her caretaker for years, watching her health and memory fade, never suspecting that the story of my life, the one she'd told me, was a lie. After the funeral, I told my siblings, Tom and Rachel, what she'd said. They didn't even try to hide their laughter. "You've finally lost it," Tom said, shaking his head. "You're not some lost prince, Danny. You're just broke." Rachel smirked and added, "Good riddance, bastard." That night, they kicked me out of the house my mother had left behind. I didn't argue. I packed what little I had into a duffel bag and walked out without looking back. For the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go. The weeks that followed blurred together. Cheap motels, then homeless shelters, then nights spent in my car when there was no room left. I looked for work, but between grief, exhaustion, and something I couldn't name, this gnawing sense that everything had been built on a lie, I couldn't function. I stopped calling people back. I stopped explaining. Then, 3 months later, it happened. I was eating at a soup kitchen downtown when a man in a dark suit walked straight toward me. His shoes were polished, his coat spotless. He looked completely out of place. He asked if I was Daniel Reed. I nodded, confused. He introduced himself as a private investigator hired by an estate firm in Manhattan. Then he said the words that made my hands tremble. "Your real father owns half of Manhattan. His $2 billion will names only you." Before I could react, he leaned closer and added 7 more words in a low, careful voice, 7 words that froze me where I sat. He said, "But your father doesn't know you're alive." I didn't sleep that night. The investigator's words kept circling in my head like a loop that wouldn't stop spinning. Your father doesn't know you're alive. His name was Martin Hale, a name that meant nothing to me at first. But when the investigator pulled out a photo, I recognized the man instantly. I'd seen him in newspapers, on the covers of magazines, shaking hands with mayors and celebrities. Martin Hale, real estate tycoon, philanthropist, the kind of man who had entire skyscrapers named after him. The investigator, whose name was Carter, handed me a thin folder. Inside was a DNA test request, a photo of a mansion on Fifth Avenue, and a copy of Martin Hale's obituary. He'd died just a week earlier. The report said he'd left behind a sprawling estate, several business holdings, and no surviving family. But there, in black and white, it stated, "In the event of discovery of a biological heir, the estate will transfer in full." That's when it hit me. My mother hadn't just lied to me. She'd stolen me. Carter told me to meet him at a law firm downtown the next morning. "If the DNA matches," he said, "your inheritance is real. But understand this, you'll be walking into a family war that never ended." I didn't know what he meant by that, but I agreed. I spent the night in the back of my car again, parked near the river, trying to picture the man I might have called father. Did he ever look for me? Did he even know I'd existed before my mother took me? The next morning, I showed up at the address he'd given me, a tall glass building in Midtown. Security checked my ID twice before letting me in. Carter was waiting with 2 men in suits who looked like they hadn't slept either. They swabbed my cheek, logged the sample, and said results would come within 24 hours. Before I left, one of the lawyers leaned in and said something that made my stomach twist. He said, "If your blood matches his, you'll inherit everything. But be careful, Mr. Reed. There are people who'd rather that test never sees daylight." When I stepped out onto the street, the city looked different, colder, heavier. I didn't know it yet, but by morning, my name would be on every screen in that building. And before the week was over, someone would try to make sure I never reached the truth. The call came at 6:12 a.m. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but there was a tension behind it. "Mr. Reed, the results are back. It's a match. You're Martin Hale's biological son." For a long moment, I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the cracked ceiling of my car. The words didn't feel real. Me, a man who'd been sleeping in shelters and back seats, was now the sole heir to a $2 billion empire. When I arrived at the law firm later that morning, Carter met me in the lobby. He looked different now, nervous. He guided me through a maze of glass offices to a conference room overlooking the skyline. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "But it's not going to be easy." On the table were stacks of legal documents, property deeds, corporate charts. My father had owned pieces of half the city, buildings, hotels, development projects. But the last page in the folder was different. It was a handwritten letter, dated only a month before his death. It read, "To my son, wherever you are, I never stopped searching. If you found this, it means the truth has reached you at last. But know this, what took you from me still walks among us. Don't trust anyone who offers you help." Start with the photograph. A black and white photo was paperclipped to the page, two women standing beside a crib. One of them was my mother. The other, I didn't recognize. Carter noticed my reaction. "We believe that woman on the right is Margaret Quinn," he said. "She was Martin Hale's secretary for nearly 20 years. She vanished in 1982, the same year you were taken." The pieces started fitting together in ways I didn't like. My mother had been a nurse at a city hospital that same year. If the photo was real, it meant she hadn't acted alone. Someone had helped her take me, and that someone had ties to my father's company. Before I could ask another question, Carter's phone buzzed. He frowned, then glanced at me. "We have to leave. Now." I followed him out, confusion turning to unease. As we stepped into the elevator, he said only one thing. "Someone just accessed your father's vault at Hale Tower. It's been sealed for 40 years. The elevator doors closed, and I felt it in my gut. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about why I'd been stolen in the first place. Hale Tower stood like a monument to power, 50 floors of glass and steel rising over Midtown, each one reflecting a skyline my father had helped build. I'd seen the building 1,000 times before, but walking toward it that morning felt different. It didn't feel like a place I was meant to enter. It felt like a fortress guarding a secret. Carter flashed his credentials at security and led me through the marble lobby. Everyone stared as we passed, like they could feel something was off. The elevator ride up was silent. Only when we reached the 37th floor did he finally speak. "Your father's private vault is inside his old office. No one's opened it since 1982, not even his lawyers." The office was frozen in time. The air smelled faintly of old leather and dust. His desk was massive, oak polished to a dull shine, and behind it hung a portrait of him. Sharp suit, silver hair, a man who looked carved out of control and confidence. The vault was behind the bookshelf, hidden by a sliding panel that clicked open when Carter entered a passcode. I stared at the steel door. The keypad flickered red, then green. Inside, there were no gold bars, no stacks of cash, just boxes. Dozens of them. Labeled, dated, organized. My father had been meticulous. Carter opened the first one, revealing files and photographs. The photo on top stopped me cold. It was the same picture from the letter, the two women beside the crib. Only this time, someone had written names on the back. The woman I didn't recognize wasn't just a secretary. Her name was Margaret Quinn. But under it, someone had written a second word in darker ink, handler. I opened another box. Inside were hospital records, newspaper clippings, and security reports. One document stood out. It was stamped, classified, and bore the logo of a private security firm called Hale Protective Services. The report detailed an internal investigation from 1982. It described a breach involving unauthorized personnel in the neonatal wing of Manhattan General Hospital. Carter leaned over my shoulder, reading, "That's the same week you were born." Before I could respond, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, followed by the distant sound of the elevator. Carter looked up sharply. "We're not alone," he said. I closed the box and turned toward the door. From the reflection in the glass wall, I saw three men step into the office, black suits, earpieces, and cold, practiced eyes. They weren't here for paperwork. They were here for me. The moment those men stepped into the office, the air changed. They moved with precision, three shadows crossing the threshold like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. I didn't need to ask who they were. Every instinct told me they weren't from the firm. Carter reacted first. He pulled a small badge from his jacket and raised it slightly. "Federal investigation," he said evenly. But the man in front didn't even glance at it. He simply replied, "Not anymore." That was when Carter's face shifted from control to fear. He grabbed my arm and whispered one word, "Run." I didn't argue. We slipped out the side door just as one of the men reached for his holster. The next sound was a sharp crack, a silenced shot hitting the glass above my head. The window shattered. Carter shoved me toward the stairwell, and we started down. We didn't speak until we reached the 28th floor, both of us breathing hard. "They're not police," I said finally. Carter nodded. "Private contractors. Probably the same people your father was trying to keep out." I asked the question that had been clawing at me since the moment they appeared. Why would anyone want me dead? He looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't noticed before, guilt. "Because, Daniel," he said quietly, "you're the only person who can expose what really happened in 1982. We made it to the service exit and slipped into the alley behind the tower. Carter handed me a USB drive. "Everything you need is on this. Names, documents, the trail your father left. Keep it hidden." He started to walk away, but I caught his sleeve. "Where are you going?" "To buy us time," he said. "If I don't make it, find the name on the drive. Margaret Quinn. She's still alive." Before I could stop him, he turned the corner and vanished into the street. Seconds later, I heard the squeal of tires, the echo of a struggle, and then, nothing. I didn't wait to find out what happened. I ran. That night, I hid in a cheap motel outside the city, the drive clutched in my hand. I plugged it into my laptop, and a single encrypted file appeared. The title was one word: Project Air. I clicked it open, and what I saw made me realize my mother hadn't just stolen me to hide me. She'd stolen me to save me. The file opened to a series of documents, blueprints, and medical records, each stamped with the same heading: Project Air. The deeper I read, the colder I felt. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about creation. My father, Martin Hale, hadn't just been a real estate mogul. According to the documents, he'd been funding a private research program in the early 80s, a collaboration between Hale Industries and a biomedical firm called Quintech Laboratories. The project's goal: to create a genetic line immune to certain hereditary diseases that had plagued the Hale family for generations. And I was the result. The files described Subject 7, the only successful case. Born in 1982. Mother, surrogate. Status, missing, presumed deceased. That's when I understood why my mother's confession hadn't been about guilt. It had been about warning me. She hadn't stolen me for money. She'd taken me because I wasn't supposed to survive. According to the notes, the experiment had gone wrong. Several early subjects, infants, had developed complications that made them unstable physically and psychologically. The surviving files were clear. After the last trial, Quintech ordered all remaining test subjects terminated and records destroyed. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the attached images. Hospital wing sealed off, police reports marked accidental fire, and an internal memo signed by someone I recognized. Margaret Quinn. It all came together in a single line from one of her letters: "The child lives." She took him before the retrieval team arrived. The walls of the motel room felt like they were closing in. Someone had killed to keep this buried. And now that I'd opened the file, they'd know exactly where to find me. I copied everything onto a second drive, wrapped it in duct tape, and hid it inside the lining of my duffel bag. Then I shut off my phone, wiped the laptop, and left through the back door. The night was silent except for the hum of traffic on the highway. I walked until my feet ached, every step heavier than the last. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. My mother hadn't lied when she said she'd stolen me. But the truth was far darker than I could have imagined. She hadn't stolen a son. She'd stolen a secret the world was never supposed to find out existed. I reached the edge of the city by sunrise. The motel was miles behind me, and my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Every word from that file played on repeat in my head. Subject 7. Terminated and destroyed. If that was true, I wasn't just an heir. I was proof that something monstrous had been done. I found a cheap diner near the highway and sat in the back booth with a cup of coffee that tasted like metal. I needed to think, to figure out what came next. There was only one name that mattered now: Margaret Quinn. The woman who'd helped take me, the woman who'd vanished, the one person who knew why my father had funded all of this. I used an old laptop at a public library to search for her. Nothing recent. Just a few scattered mentions from the 80s, a research grant, an interview about genetics, and then disappearance. She'd gone off the grid completely after 1983. But a deeper search turned up something unexpected, a property deed under her name in upstate New York, the same county where my mother had raised me. That couldn't be a coincidence. I borrowed a map, memorized the address, and caught a bus heading north. The town was small, one grocery store, a post office, and a church that looked abandoned. The address led me to an old farmhouse at the end of a gravel road surrounded by dying trees. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the smell of dust and something chemical. Papers covered the floor, research notes, torn photographs, and medical diagrams. I moved carefully, scanning everything until I saw a faded photo pinned to the wall. It was my father, younger, standing beside a woman in a lab coat. The handwriting underneath said, "Hale and Quinn, prototype complete." Then I heard it, a faint sound behind me. A floorboard creaked. I turned slowly, heart pounding. An old woman stood in the doorway, her gray hair tangled, her face sharp and familiar. She said my name before I could speak. "Daniel, you're exactly what they feared you'd become." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with awe. That was when I realized she wasn't surprised to see me. She'd been waiting. For a moment, neither of us moved. The woman standing in front of me, Margaret Quinn, looked frail, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She studied me like she was seeing a ghost. I finally managed to speak. "You knew my father." She nodded slowly. "I knew him better than most. But I knew your mother even more. She saved you, Daniel. She did what I couldn't." Her words hit like a physical blow. "Save me from what?" I asked. She motioned for me to sit. The house was dim, lit only by the gray light leaking through broken curtains. Every surface was covered with files, journals, and old medical equipment. She lowered herself into a chair across from me. "Project AIR wasn't about curing disease," she said. "That was the cover story. It was about control, altering the human genome to remove emotional instability, fear, hesitation. Your father wanted to build something perfect, something he could trust to lead after him." I didn't understand at first. "You're saying I was engineered?" "Not engineered," she said softly. "Designed. You were born stronger, faster, more resilient." But what they didn't tell him was that perfection comes at a cost. The others, they couldn't handle the modifications. You were the only one who lived. That's why your mother ran. She turned toward a file cabinet and pulled out a single photograph. It showed a small hospital room, the same one from the earlier photos, but in this one, there was fire damage on the walls. "We faked your death that night," she said. "Your mother took you before they arrived. I stayed behind to make sure they believed you were gone." I stared at the image, feeling my throat tighten. "Who are they?" She hesitated. "Quintech still exists, Daniel. It never stopped. They've been watching you since the day you turned 18. The trust fund your mother opened under your name. The one she said was from an anonymous donor? That was them. Monitoring you. Waiting for signs." I felt my pulse quicken. Signs of what? Her expression darkened. Of activation. Before I could ask what she meant, the windows shattered. The sound came like thunder, glass exploding inward, doors slamming open. Margaret's eyes went wide. "They found us," she whispered. The windows blew inward in a storm of glass and dust. 3 men in tactical gear burst through the doorway, rifles raised, their movements mechanical and precise. Margaret didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just turned toward me and whispered, "Go." I froze for half a second, but something in me moved before my mind did. My body reacted. Fast, sharper than it should have been. I dove for the back hallway just as the first shot cracked through the air. Wood splintered beside my head. Margaret shouted something I couldn't make out, and then there was another gunshot, closer this time. I hit the ground, crawled toward the rear exit, and shoved open the door. The cold air outside hit like a slap. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just kept moving down the gravel road as the echo of gunfire faded into the trees. When I finally stopped, my chest burned, but my body felt off. I wasn't winded the way I should have been. My pulse was steady, too steady. My muscles trembled with energy, not exhaustion. Margaret's words echoed in my head. Activation. I hid in the woods until nightfall, replaying everything in my mind. Margaret had known they'd find her. She'd been waiting for it. And whatever they'd done to me, it was surfacing now. When darkness settled, I made my way back toward the farmhouse. It was burning. The flames swallowed the roof, lighting up the sky in a dull orange haze. I stood at the edge of the trees, frozen, watching everything she'd kept hidden turn to ash. There was no sign of her body, no movement inside, just the quiet roar of fire devouring the truth. Then I saw them. Two black SUVs parked on the road, their engines still running. Men in suits stood nearby, talking into earpieces, scanning the tree line with flashlights. I ducked down behind a rock and waited until they drove off. When they were gone, I went back to what was left of the house. Amid the ashes and smoke, something glinted in the debris. A small metal case, half melted but intact. Inside was a drive, engraved with a single word. Origin. I didn't know it then, but that drive would answer everything. Who I was, what I'd been made for, and why my father had spent billions trying to destroy the very thing he created, me. I drove through the night until the horizon turned gray. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the skin along my knuckles split. I didn't stop until I reached an abandoned rest area off the interstate. That's where I opened the metal case again and stared at the word engraved on the drive, Origin. My laptop took minutes to power up, the fan whining in protest. The drive contained a single encrypted folder. I bypassed the security the same way I'd done before. Years of tinkering with code had taught me enough. When the files opened, I realized it wasn't just data. It was a confession. The first document was written in my father's handwriting. Project Air, Final Phase Termination Report. He'd written, Subject 7 shows unprecedented adaptability and regenerative capacity. Psychological stability remains unpredictable. Quinn warns activation may trigger irreversible effects. I ordered termination. She defied it. There were more notes, clinical, detached, but between the lines, I could feel his fear. If Subject 7 survives, retrieve at all costs. If containment fails, eliminate. I scrolled further and found surveillance photos. Me, from years I didn't even remember. A playground. My high school graduation. The shelter where I'd slept after my mother's death. They'd been watching me all along. Every step, every failure, every quiet corner of my life. It had never been private. The last video file auto-played without sound. It showed a man, my father, sitting at his desk, older, frail, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. His lips moved, then subtitles appeared, transcribed automatically by the file's system. If you're seeing this, you lived. You were never meant to be my legacy, Daniel. You were meant to be my penance. I built you to correct my own flaws, to create someone who could live without fear, without weakness. But all I made was another man who could feel pain deeper than any machine. If you want freedom, you must disappear. Burn everything. Become no one. The screen went dark. For a long time, I sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down like concrete. I looked at my reflection in the laptop screen. Same eyes, same jawline, and finally understood. I wasn't the heir to his fortune. I was the end of his experiment. As the first light of dawn broke across the highway, I stepped out of the car, tossed the drive into the dirt, and crushed it beneath my boot. Some legacies aren't meant to be inherited. Some are meant to be erased. And for the first time in my life, I felt human enough to walk away. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.